Hello, so in this tutorial we would create UI and some ways to building towers, and we made a pretty good system for upgrades. So if I want to have upgrades for, let's say, this tower, all I need to do is let's just create a third version, so tower 2, and let's make it a green one. I would just save it as original prefab and delete it. And now let's uh, drop it in the upgrade list. And with that, we've got an upgrade for this tower. So if you want an upgrade for the green one, you just drop any tower inside the upgrade list. So now let's create a highlight for the tile. So when we would select the tile, we would have this green circle, and if we press off tile, it would disappear. I would create new class called user input manager, and let's go into it. So let's go inside our board and let's create some method to get some node based on world position. So node and from world point. Okay, so we get vector2 position, vector2 position, okay, and we want to get our nodes. So what we're going to do is, first of all, we take this position and we would reduce from it our transformed position. Then we want to, because each tile is one by one, we want to shift it a little bit. So let's remove vector2 1 times 0.5f, and this one should be vector 2. Now we want to check if the position x is greater than 0, is if it's less than 0, or pos.y less than 0. So right now it's already within the bounds of 0 to some value, maybe. If it is, it's exactly the node we need. Just need to convert it to int. So pos.x, if it's greater than size.x, or pos.y is greater than size.y. Now we want to return null, and in case it's not null, we just say map pos int pos x int pos y, and this should do it. Inside the user input manager, we want to get the key, so input get key down, so key code mouse 0. So when we press the mouse, we would check if we are on the node in the board, and we would want to highlight it. And so actually let's say public board board, and let's call it target board. We would pass it manually. Var mouse pose is going to be private camera. So we need the camera. So camera.main. So we get the main camera, and now we check where we pressed on the actual screen. So screen to world point. Now we pass input dot mouse position. Now we got the actual mouse position. Where node is going to be target board dot get from world point mouse position. So from world point is actually a terrible name. Let's just change it real quick. Node from world point. And this is it. Now let's, for now, say what type it is. And let's check this out. And we've got some errors. So I didn't save my other script. And we need to drop the user script. Let's pull the game manager. And now it's working, probably. So yeah, we press on the portal and we get -2. In here it's 0. And this tile is -1. Let's check if this one working. Yeah. And outside the screen we get the arrow because there is no type. As for the highlight, I made this circle in Sprite. And now I've made this green circle over here. Just a bunch of sprites, and we would put this one on the tile we selected. Okay, so inside the user input manager, I would actually create a copy of the prefab. So we would just pass the prefab, so transform, marker, and prefab. And this should be public. And in here, let's create a public transform marker. Actually, transform marker. Okay, so on start, we would say marker is equal to instantiate marker prefab. And in here, let's say marker dot set dot game object dot set active is going to be false. And once we press on something, if the node exists as is not equal to null, we would simply say marker dot position is going to be node dot position, so we don't have this right now. So let's go inside the node and say public vector free position is going to be when we set get if the terrain exists. Actually, let's just return board.transform.position plus new vector free size x, y, 0. So inside the input manager, we want to actually activate the marker. So marker.gameObject.setActive is going to be true when we hit some nodes, and else we simply disable it. So I want to change my hierarchy here. So I would create a new game object. This would be the game manager, and the game manager would be just board. Okay, and in here let's put the user input interface and put the board here. I deleted the user interface from the camera, and the transform for it, I created this prefab over here, and let's drop it. And now let's play, and yep, it's working. Inside the user input manager, I just want to say marker.parent is going to be this transform. So the marker would be child of the game manager or whatever script, whatever game object this user input manager is sitting on. So I implemented the bounded camera script and just integrated it inside my user input manager. So now the user input manager does exactly what the bounded camera with a few tweaks, but generally it's the same. So we have the first part of the tutorial, and all of this is just the code from the bounded camera. All that means is now I can actually scroll the map, and that just means it would be less of a hassle if the camera is not fitting all the board. And when I press on the screen, I want to have some UI from this side, and it would show me the upgrades I can make or buildings I can put on the tile. And for that, first of all, I would just say, okay, we would have the camera render only on this 90% of the screen, and now it just works fine. And in here I would have permanent UI. I'll set the camera to be 0.1 on the X, so 90% of the screen. Let's create a texture, so an image. Let's make the anchors to be the whole screen. And in here we would say the max X would be 0.1, and on the right it would be 0. So now it's exactly 10%. Okay, so now let's create buttons. So I want to have as many buttons as I want. So I would just duplicate this. This would be the mask. So we'll drop this one on top of this. And let's remove the image from the second copy. And in here, let's say a layout. So we want vertical layout group. And now I want to add a button onto it. So let's add the text mesh button, and let's set it to this size. Now if we create more copies of the button, you can see they are organized nicely, but we want to actually disable these. Let's make some like spacing between them. This would be fine. I'll quickly change the sprite over here. So I would set it to this sprite, and let's make the buttons to be somewhere around this size. Let's change the size to 18. And now if I create more buttons, they are like this. Okay, and if we press play, we can press the button, so it works nice, but we have no way of getting to the lower buttons. So we want to say a scroll area, scroll rect, and we want to enable the vertical scroll and set the image to be our scroll area. Now we can actually scroll, but as you can see, because the area of the second image component, so let's call it content, is way too small. We can't actually scroll too much. So if I set this area to be bigger, somewhere around here, we can scroll even way too far. And yeah, Now we can scroll too much. So to fix that issue, we need to add content size filter and preferred size and preferred size. Now if I remove some buttons, it should shrink. And the preferred size, we also want to have minimum size, so a layout element, ignore layout, actually don't, and mean height would be around, what's the height of this element? So the height of the canvas is 245, and now it fits perfectly. So we add more, and it's shrinking. Nice. So now we can add more. Now another thing I want to say is mask. So rect mask 2D, and now it's just perfect. So maybe we can set this to be black or something. Now it's perfect. So if we have one button only and we disable the layout element, you would get your buttons to be in the middle. And I don't really want this effect, so this is why I have the layout element. Now I want to have an icon on the button, so I would create new image. I would set it to fit the button scale, and I would set the pivots to be 0.08 and 0.0515, and now just set the borders to be exactly. And now if we set some icons, so maybe this tower, we have an icon. And now let's just save this prefab. Another cool feature with the layout content is if we disable one button, they would still perfectly match. So that means you can actually have tons of buttons and just assign them different on-click properties and just disable them when you don't need them anymore. And you can reuse that way buttons. Now let's create UI Manager script. So UI Manager. So our UI Manager, I would drop it inside the canvas, would be responsible for creating buttons and changing their functionality. So now each button should have a button script. So let's call it upgrade button script. Update button should be fine. And let's drop it inside the button. And we probably, for now at least, only want two types of button. One that would create a tower and upgrade it, it's the same thing would be, and one that sells it. So we can fit it inside one type. So this would be the upgrade button. Let's save the change, and I would remove this button. Now inside the UI manager, I would make sure I only have one UI manager. So public static UI manager instance. Now if instance, actually I don't care, say just instance equals to this, and this should do it. We also want to have public transform upgrade button, and this would be prefab button prefab, And we want another thing. This would be the content, the transform of the content. And probably want to say using Unity Engine UI. I would also want to have a private list of all the upgrade buttons we already have. So let's call it active buttons or simply buttons. Should be fine. So each time we would generate new buttons, we first of all would just go over all the buttons in here, disable them, take the first, like if we need 5 buttons, so we take the first 5, and if there is only 3 in here, we would just create 2 more, but we would always just reuse the same buttons. When we press on a node, we would want to get the node object, and if there is one, we would try to retrieve the upgrades from it, and if they're known, we would simply take it from the board. So inside the board, I would create a public tower, or let's even call it node object. Objects. For now, towers. Towers should be fine. So towers and a default upgrades, and inside tower, let's have something like public float cost. So let's say 50 F would be the cost. We want to also have a private sprite icon. So we would set it separately, and serialized field, and let's say a method on validate, void on validate. So this would always be called and execute in edit mode. Now, so class tower should probably be a scriptable object, but whatever. Now, on validate if icon is null, we would simply get the sprite renderer. So var renderer would be get component sprite renderer, and now icon would be renderer dot sprite. So now if we didn't assign an icon, it would just take it from our tower. So maybe our sprite on the tower is actually bad for icon and it doesn't fit right. So we can change it to something else. And now if we go inside the Unity editor, we can see that those icons were assigned just as we wanted. Now I would set it to none, and it's always sets itself back, so I can change it to something else, but there would always be an icon. So we are inside the node, and now we want to create a public list so we can actually get it. So tower get upgrade list, and this would return us. So if node object not equal to null, we want to return node object dot upgrade. So upgrade list. So we don't actually have one, and else we just return board dot default upgrades. And actually in here, if oh yeah, this should be fine. So again, if we have a wall or a portal, it would actually have a node object and it would be just empty. Now we go inside the node object and let's create public tower and upgrade list. Upgrade list. And this should do it. So one quick fix we need to do before that is let's actually set the wall to be a node object. So I would just remove it in here. So if we have node object, we would destroy it, and else we, if type is 0, we do nothing, else we create this type. Now in the create object, node objects, so in here, let's say node objects dot add wall prefab dot id and node wall prefab, and this one would just generate a wall. And now in the reference, we don't need to even set the type. So this should fix this issue. So inside the node, we want to have a method that would handle upgrades. So public void handle upgrade and int id. So we pass the id, and if of course we want to make sure that our get upgrade list is greater than in this length is greater than 0. So first of all, we would just say var upgrades. We get the upgrade list, and if the upgrades dot length is greater than 0, we can do something. So next step, if upgrades length is less than id, is greater than id, then we can start worrying about what to do. So maybe this actually should be one if. Okay, so if id would be equal to -1, and this would sell the tower. So we would say type is equal to 0 and upgrade and update node, and that should do it. Else we say upgrade, so type would be equal, so build the tower. So we also need to say some checks. So if so bool enough money, and for now it would be true. So if enough money, we say type is equal to upgrades dot id, upgrades id dot id, and we say again update node. So with that, we can actually create towers. So we now want to create our buttons. So we would say public void get show upgrades, and we pass a node focus, and this would get the upgrades. So focus dot get upgrade list, and now what we want to do is we want to go over all the buttons. So what I would create here is a private int active, and let's set it to 0. So for I active, we would first of all say buttons I dot game object dot set active false. So now we go inside the button and we'd say public void show upgrade, and in here let's get node focus node and upgrade. So tower, this would be the upgrade. And now we want to have variables so we can actually save it. So private node current, private tower current upgrade. We also want to have private sprite renderer, and let's make it serializable. Now inside the show upgrade, we say this dot current is focus, and this dot current upgrade is upgrade. Is going to be the upgrade. We want to have public void apply upgrade, and this one would be node focus. So this would get nothing. And this is when we click. So on click, and in here we only need to update the icon. So sprite renderer dot sprite is equal to upgrade dot. So inside the tower we want to have a method to get the icon, and public get sprite get icon upgrade. So this would return the icon, and let's go inside the upgrade button, and this would be get icon. And now when we click, we want to say current dot handle upgrade, and the target ID would be the So in here, we want to also pass int ID and private int ID. So this is probably unnecessary. So yeah, let's go inside the, yeah, I would actually leave it so you can't cheat the system to build a tower you cannot. And this ID is ID. Now we pass the ID. Okay, so if the number of buttons is greater than the number of upgrades, we simply can go and take as many buttons as we need. So if upgrades.length is less than button.count, we simply go for upgrades dot length, and in here we say each button would be active now, and buttons I dot what did we call it? Show upgrade. So show upgrade, and this would be our focus node and the upgrades I and the I. Okay, and else we do exactly the same thing, except we start with buttons.count. Now we create the same thing, but in here we go, I would be buttons.count, and this would be upgrades.count length. Now instead of doing this, we say this is new instantiate. So let's create a new method, would be public yes, so public upgrade button would be add create button. So we would create new button. So our button is going to be instantiate button prefab, and button dot parent or dot parent is going to be our content transform, and now we need to do is return button, and inside of here we say buttons dot add this button. Now we simply say var button is create new one, and button dot show upgrade focus and upgrades I. And this should do it. So final step, if the node exists, we simply say UI manager instance dot set. How did we call this? So show upgrades. And for this node. So now let's just prepare everything. Now we need to drop this content over here. Go inside our UI, drop the button prefab. Let's take the button prefab and for now let's disable the text over here. And the button layout need the sprite renderer. So yeah, we can see I have one little problem over here. So this should be using Unity Engine UI, and this is private image and icon. And this should do it. Image, put it, okay, this works. And save this button. Let's delete it and let's try this out. So nothing happening. And I guess the problem is that we don't have a default upgrade, so let's drop our towers in here. Let's drop this one, and this one. More. So for some reason, when I press on nothing, it doesn't really change, and it doesn't do anything. Oh, yes, so we actually forgot something. Let's create the button, and this on click should take this upgrade function and call the apply upgrade. So save it, remove it, press again. Ooh, and this works. But I can, so this doesn't work. So we can see that it doesn't really update which thing was created last, and we can't override existing towers. So now we are inside the UI manager, and I forgot to use the active property over here. So all we need to do in the end, so when we do show upgrades, what we are supposed to do over here is say active is over here. Let's say active is going to be upgrades dot length, and now this should work. So this is working, and now when we build towers, it does actually do something. Like maybe we want to hide the UI when we press when we upgrade. Now if we press on something that isn't a node, so the UI doesn't hide the UI and we can actually build stuff. So I mean, probably what we want to do is when we press on the UI, we don't want to hide the marker, we want to leave it on here. And another thing I want to do is let's create an upgrades for our tower. So if I go inside this tower and I drop this tower to be an upgrade, now you would expect this tower to have an upgrade, and it does, but it's not really red and it doesn't really show up as red. So let's fix this. So the initial problem we have is on the board we have this towers array, and that means every time we create new tower like this one, we have to go over here and drop it in here. So let's say you create 15 more towers you would need manually, just drop everyone. Then the second problem, we need to always assign this ID variable over here, and it should be unique. So we actually want to automate it. So the first step, let's create the resource folder and drop the towers in here. That means we can load these resources at runtime. And we go inside the board. Let's completely remove the tower variable and just say var towers is going to be resources dot load all, and we would load uh, inside the folder towers a type of tower. And the only problem here is that this returns object, so we just need to cast it. And that's it. Let's fix the issue with the ID. So if we have ID greater than 0, that means we don't really care what the ID does. So let's create void set unique ID, and let's create private static next ID, and this would start with 1 int, and in here if ID is greater than 0, we would simply say ID is equal to next ID and next ID plus plus. And with that we go inside the tower and we would actually call this, so not tower, actually want to go inside the board. Now the issue is this node object dictionary, so let's create a method that drops stuff in here. So public void add the game object, this would be actually private, and this would get node object new object, and in here we would simply say an object is equal an object dot set how did we call this? So yeah, public void set, so set unique ID. So in case of the floor and portal and wall, they have a negative ID or an ID of 0, so nothing would happen, but with towers this will happen. And now we simply drop this and say node an object dot ID and an object. And this would take even the original inside our Unity prefab and whatever. And now what we need to do is just change this everywhere. So here we just pass tower and portal prefab and wall prefab. And with this, it should work. And if we run it right now, we can see that this is working as it was. And now if we press on this tower that had the red tower's upgrade, still this is white, but if we build it, it's actually the red one. So this is working. So now the problem is just the UI doesn't show the icon color. So this is easy to fix. So now what we actually want to do is create this private color, and this would just return color is equal to and this. So you can see this is becoming very inefficient. So on validate would be called thousands of times. So we need to fix all this mess. Like we need to create a database that contains all the icons and colors and create them only one time. So yeah, ideally we want to just separate the upgrade from the actual towers. We would do it in another tutorial, I guess. We go inside the upgrade button and we say get upgrade icon, and let's just make this, instead of returning just sprite, it would return sprite and color, and this would return the icon and the color. And in the upgrade button we just get here var icon data and sprite. So icon dot color is going to be icon data item 2, and icon dot sprite is going to be icon data item 1. And to disable the marker disappearing when we press off screen, we just would set this to be a comment. So now when we upgrade something, I would want to just show the next upgrade UI instead of the old one. And we would simply go inside our upgrade button and like apply upgrades. So this is the current stuff. So what we are going to say is UI manager dot instance dot show upgrades for current. So let's test this, and we can see the UI is gone. If we build this tower, we get the next upgrade and it saves the right color. Another issue I found, I added the upgrades to this tower, and now if we build this one, you can see we've got two towers on each other. So the thing is, we simply do not actually destroy the towers beneath it and the tiles. So yeah. So the problem was the upgrade node. We save the terrain is not null. We go to game object, destroy terrain. So terrain was actually a node object. So we just removing the node object. Instead, we want to destroy the whole game object. So this is it. And now this is actually working as it should, and no problem. So this is it for this tutorial, and I will see you in the next one. We would build the pathfinding for enemies, and probably this, maybe we would add HP, so yeah, we will see.